How do composers compose without an instrument? I was recently asked. And it's a very good question because it has to do with an ability to link what we hear in our heads with something that we can write down. It sounds complicated at first, but it's actually not that difficult when you think about it in a different perspective. We can imagine all sorts of things. We can imagine smells. You can imagine the smell of a lemon without holding a lemon. We can imagine sounds. We can imagine voices. We remember voices of our friends and our family members. We can imagine visual, abstract and non-abstract things, colors. And the same with pitches. When Beethoven got deaf, it did not alter his ability to write music at all because he was able to imagine in his head the sound of instruments that he knew so well. He could imagine anything vertically. He could imagine progression of harmonies horizontally. He could imagine timbres, and he also could imagine tempos in which he wanted his works to be performed. When Bach was blind, he would tell one of his sons to write down the music for him because he could not do that anymore. He would just tell him write D sharp or E flat or anything. It is always important to remember that different composers had different levels of abilities with composition without an instrument. For example, Tchaikovsky always would write piano scores of his orchestral works first and then take separate time to orchestrate those. Even got a bit laughed at because of that. Mahler would only write full orchestral scores down without leaving any piano scores. Everybody's different. I remember I was 5 and I had all sorts of musical ideas in my head and I wanted to share them with my mom because I would hear an orchestra or a quartet or different solo instruments in my head and I wanted my mom to hear that, and I would go and say, Mom, put your ear next to my ear and listen to what I hear. And she would pretend she can hear it. She would go, oh yeah, this is wonderful, and would prompt me to try to play it on the piano for her. And I would do a little bit, but still early on I realized I could hear things in much more detail in my head, and I was very eager to learn how to write the music down, to be able to deal with it and to see what I was imagining in my head. An ability to write down something that you hear is not a rocket science or anything, and it can be developed. I would love to give you a hint about it. One of the hints could be dealing more with sight reading, sight singing, and score reading. And why, I will tell you now. When you sight read, you force yourself to comprehend written information very quickly and transform it into the sound. It links closer the written information with the information of a pitch in your brain. More you sight read, closer that relationship becomes. And not only you become a better sight reader, you also will be better in imagining sounds in your head and identifying what exactly you hear. When you sight sing, you develop a muscle memory in your vocal cords of how different intervals feel when you sing them. And more you do that, more that muscle memory develops. But with that muscle memory, you also develop a memory of different pitches and their relationships in your brain. And when you score read, which is another very, very important thing to do, not only if you want to write things down, but as a performer. So one of the favorite things of mine to do, you take a score of something that you know and you look at the written music and try to imagine that music in your head with all detail. Try to imagine exact pitch and just play it as a recording in your head looking at the score. That way you quickly convert what you see into what you hear, and that aids in ability to do the opposite. As a performer, it also helps to shape your interpretation, but it's a whole another conversation. I just wanted to say that dealing with the written music without an instrument and trying to process it will help you to do the opposite thing. If you have any other questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer.